Okay, so we were looking at this book that was written. It was really written as kind of a letter from Rabbi Nachman Steinhardt. This is very early. This is like 1809, I think, or 1812. And he writes it to his friend, and the friend ends up publishing it. It's not clear, how happy he was about that. But the rabbis in Noga HaTzedek are on some level, they're Orthodox, but they're considered reformers in a way. This is even earlier. This is in Westphalia. This is when there's the first beginnings of reform. He's part of the Consistator, which is like this in Germany, France, and others still have it in France. It was a body of rabbis, in this case, 3 rabbis who were appointed by the Jewish community, but as a liaison to the government. And it seems that the person who appointed these was Israel Jacobson, who was considered like really the kind of the first reformer, and one of the first. And so of course he's picking people that will be open-minded about change. But I mean, this is very early. We're talking about very traditional rabbis. So from this letter, you can also get a sense of the very early changes that are being suggested. Again, this is like 1809 or 1812. So this is early on, Westphalia. The rabbis of the Consistory, who are the official body to the government. And this person, Rabbi Steinhardt, is definitely, there's a question, would you consider him a reformer or not? So we'll see his writing. So here he's writing to his friend and he says, She'elatenu, the question that you heard that Sheshamata Chachma Mikama Takanot Shetikninu, you've heard about these changes that we made, and you want to know why we made them and what the rationale is. So these changes have been heard about. There's sort of this like school for young people, but there's also seems to be a shul, and Israel Jacobson starts it, and this Rabbi Steinhardt is defending it. And here are the changes. So he says, Ahuvi, my dear one, ma omer lacha bazeh, kulam ein lahem shoresh beGemara. These changes that we've made, they do not have a source in the Gemara. V'lakach al tikva lishmoa mimeni bazeh pilpul osfar. He says the changes that we've made are not based on not things that you'll find in halacha or in the Gemara, and therefore I can't give you a halachic dissertation about why we do them. Rak shikol hadat, the decisions that we've made, the changes that we've made are shikol hadat. They are their logic, their common sense. Das Torah, it's interesting. This is the use of the term here, das Torah, is fascinating because today das Torah, which means the knowledge of Torah or Torah wisdom, is used often to justify everything. Vote for such and such a candidate. Why? It's das Torah. That's what the rabbis tell us to do. In right-wing Orthodox communities, this is sometimes used as a phrase to justify anything. Basically, that you have to follow everything the rabbis say. Even if it's for not Jewish things. Why can't you have a woman in a rabbinic position? Das Torah. That's so. Over here, he's using it the other way. He's saying innovations that we're making. We don't have a source for them in the Talmud. Our source is das Torah. It's obvious to us that this is what the Torah wants. Our kavanah, our intent is to make more noble and more grand the house of our God, and to stop arguments among us. Mitzad ta'amim hakmusim itanu Igla aznecha shematz mineu b'efes kitziu tira v'chulu tira. There are changes, things we're doing that have not been seen. Achlo timaher alu lahashivacha al kulam pamachas. I can't give you answers about all of them at once. Kimilvada tirdut dishmaya, I'm busy with things that are holy. Vida alma haketiva kasha alai. It's hard for me to write all the details about it. I'm busy. Michtabe nayim asherli baraka shivacha achat achat. I'm going to give you some answers one by one. It says Rishon, number one. Shaltani, you asked me amasha tekninu shelo lahakif belulav b'chag v'sukkos. He says one change that we've made here in Westphalia in this sort of nouveau synagogue is that we are not going around with the lulav on Sukkos, I guess Hoshanas. Not everybody's going around, just the Chazan, and it sounds like maybe the Gabayim are going around for Hoshanas. And we're not beating the aravos, the willow on the ground on Hoshana Rabbah. Only the Chazan is doing that. Now, where does that come from? Now, you will not find the idea of circling the bima existed in the temple. You won't find beating the arav on the ground anywhere before the Ari. It comes from Kabbalah, it comes from the Arizal in the early 1500s. Now, obviously, it's a custom, and we do it, and we would consider every custom to be important as long as it's a custom that's real. And so already this custom has been around for 200-300 years, and obviously it's widespread, certainly. And but he says we get rid of that because we only want the shliach tzibur to do it. Now you could imagine why. Let's see. Da ohavi minhag zel hakif belulav b'gvulin. Why do we go around with the lulav for Hoshanas every day of Sukkot, marching around the bima with the lulav? It's in memory of the temple. But really, you don't find in the Talmud that it says you should do this as a memory of what they did in the temple. Maybe Harifa Harash, and it's not brought by the early commentators on the Talmud. Amnam Harambam B'Hatur Hevi. Its sources in Maimonides, in the Rambam, and in the Shulchan Aruch. And he quotes one other place where you find it that goes to Rush, and that it's written there, Hecha deleka lo lulav lo esrog. If you don't have a lulav and esrog, lo makifin, then you don't go around the bima every day. V'Shabbos yochiach, and he says Shabbos is the proof that you don't have to do this. Shame b'lulav, because you don't have a lulav and you don't go around, you just say the Hoshanas. Hoshana. And we're assuming because on Shabbos you don't do it, that you should do it during the week. And he says the source is the Rivan, early rabbi from, we're talking about Rishonim. The Rosh is already 1200s, 1300s. Shulchan Aruch is, of course, later. V'chein mashma milashono hecha deleka lulav klomar she'ein b'chol oto ha'ir lulav. Let's say your city doesn't have a lulav. You see from the words of these Rishonim, commentaries on the Talmud, that ein makifin below lulav. If you don't have a lulav, you don't go around the bima. But in a city where there is a lulav, you do go around. Why do they do it? In memory of the temple. And it's true, if you don't have a lulav, you don't go around. But who says that everybody has a lulav, has to go around? If we're doing it in memory of the temple, it's enough that just the Chazan will do it. And especially according to those who say it's really not in memory of the temple, it's just for joy. The Rambam has already written in his book of Jewish law about the joy of the water drawing. On Sukkot, they would draw water from the river at the bottom of the Temple Mount, And it was a very, very joyous time to make a whole parade. And some people have parties during Sukkot in memory of that, called the Simchat Beit HaShoel, the joy of the water drawing. But you see from the Rambam that even though these parties were done on Sukkot in memory of the water drawing, that not everybody would do it. It wasn't just anyone, it was Gedolei Yisrael, it was the great rabbis who would do it. And in the temple itself, only the great rabbis would do it. And everybody else would come and watch. The writes that if you don't have a lulav, you don't go around. This is an interesting question, by the way, in the shul today. What if not everyone has a lulav? Do you walk around with everybody? He says we assume from what the early commentators write, the Rishonim, that if you have a lulav, you should go around. The tour. So so he says that all they write is that in a city where there's no lulav, you don't go around. So we assume from that if you have a lulav, you should go around in a parade around the bima. But he says maybe that's not what it means. Maybe it just means that the chazan does it. And just like in the time of the temple, at the joy of the water drawing, only the rabbis would do it. You can't necessarily conclude that everybody should walk around with the lulav. That maybe not everybody should go around with the lulav because it looks too haughty. Just like in the temple, only the rabbis would do the joy of the water drawing. Zil basar time. Why do we do it? The whole idea of going around with the lulav is in memory of the temple. And in the temple itself, he says, only the Kohanim would do it. So therefore, he says, I think it's a better way to remember what happened in the temple by not having everybody in shul go around the bima with the lulav, just having the chazan do it, because only the Kohanim used to do it in the temple. And he says that, in fact, in some of our congregations, that's what's done. That it doesn't become a frivolous thing. As I've seen myself many times, that I find that when people are going around the bima with their lulav, they're pushing each other with their lulavim and with their feet, and it's a balagan. People start arguing and hating each other. Either they'll say, I go first, and the other one will say, no, I go first. There's no wisdom in all of this. If we're trying to remember what we did in the temple that should be rebuilt speedily in our days, they're not thinking about the temple. They're just elbowing each other to go around the bima. So therefore, I think it's a better thing, he says, that we should just have the chazan do it and the gabayim and the leaders. We don't want people to sin and to be fighting with each other. So it's interesting. This is very similar to 10 years later, what you find written in Nogat Tzedek, which is that obviously there were people who were much more reform, and they were just, I think, trying to be more sort of German, trying to make Jews more modern. But on the part of these very traditional Orthodox rabbis who are defending reform, you see there's like a consistent theme here, which is Orthodoxy has gotten to be a balagan. Orthodoxy has gotten to, it doesn't have the nobility that we would like to see. And that's really what we should see. It's not reform or Protestant to be organized and to not be, elbowing each other. And, just because the non-Jew is, dressed well and has good manners, doesn't mean that we have to do the opposite. It doesn't mean we have to not do that. On the contrary, that would be a greater honor of God. So I think that's what's coming out here. It's not that they're violating anything. It's not that. Right? The truth is, it's not a big deal if only a few people go around the bima. Is that a slippery slope toward reform, or no? Is that a good idea? Because maybe we should inject some sort of 1809 modern nobility into our synagogue worship, and maybe that's a great honor of God. But again, you wonder, and not every, as Rabbi Sofer, the Chassam Sofer's response that any change is forbidden. That's a radical, in a certain sense. Maybe that's the radical statement. These are not crazy things. It doesn't make you see where they're coming from here. These are very traditional people. And what happens, when somebody would come and visit the synagogue and see this, they're going to think, this is not a shul, this is not a house of prayer. There's no fear of God in this place. This resonates with us. This losing the forest for the trees. That you become so focused on the letter of the law or on your own world that you lose the sense of what does this look like in the eyes of the nations. We can understand it. And he says, and so there are those who say that if you don't have everybody go around, that's a bad thing. But if they would see the shuls today, they would change their minds. They would say it's better not to go around with the lulav, having everybody do that. And I've heard this also from others who are great fears of God, that we shouldn't have everybody go around the bima. I wonder what they do in a former conservative synagogue. I don't know if everybody goes around, or just the Chazan does. Maybe in reform they don't do it anymore. I don't know. Okay. All right, and that's what he says about going around with the lulav. Then he's going to talk about the beating of the arava on the ground. Trying to get rid of that and just have the chazan do that. So I think this is actually very interesting. It's funny, I found only one academic article about this person by a woman named Judith Belaich, but she doesn't say much about him. She tries to get a sense of whether he's a real reformer, whether you would consider him a reformer or not, and she's very unclear about it. I'll send you the article. But actually, I have not seen anybody write about these sort of changes. All the changes that we've seen about Reformation in Judaism in the early 1800s, these things we have not seen. You can see how this is like, this doesn't seem reform. This seems like almost something that an Orthodox might say, unless you end up wondering, are we formed in the image of the Chassam Sofer? Do we assume that any change is forbidden because change itself is forbidden? Maybe we have, just like we're all Maimonideans today when it comes to our understanding of God, but Maimonides was only one opinion about that. Maybe we are all sort of the product of the Chassam Sofer's response to reform, which was, put up the walls and make no changes at all, no matter what they are, even if they're halakhically viable or logical. Even if in the big picture they might be better. You have to question our own sort of vantage point. Okay, have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.